The Himalayas provide a near-impassable boundary between India and China. The Andes separate South America in two, confining Chile to this narrow strip of land along the coast. In North America too, the Appalachians proved a massive barrier for America's initial westward expansion. Mountains have always made some of the best borders. So if we look at Romania, why is it that the Carpathians run straight through the country? Wouldn't it make more sense if the border ran like this? And how did Romania even come to be in the first place? This video is brought to you by LingoPie. To understand Romania is to understand that it is divided into three general historical regions: Wallachia in the south, Moldavia in the northeast, split between west and east ever since Moldova split off, more on that later on, and Transylvania covering much of the northwest, as well as a few other regions, but we're trying to keep things somewhat simple here. While these regions share a common Latin-Romanian culture, up until a couple centuries ago, or even a century ago, these three regions were all separate principalities. Why? Well, in part because the Carpathians did separate Wallachia and Moldavia from Transylvania. The World War I fandom might even know that Romania used to look like this for a while, with Transylvania under Austria-Hungary. Confused? Good, because now you're curious. Let's look deeper into history for some answers. In the year -1 billion, Romania might not have been here. In the year -100, it was here, although back then many would have called it Dacia, on account of it being inhabited by the Dacians, a people likely related to the Thracians just to the south, who were completely unrelated to the Thraxans, themselves having no relation to the Flaxans, but we're getting off topic here. Under King Burebista, the Dacian peoples united into one singular Dacian kingdom, a centralized power that expanded through much of the lands that make up modern-day Romania, although inhabited by people who would be quite shocked to hear their country called Romania, as they spent centuries fighting viciously against the Romans. This unification, however, didn't last, as much of the area became a Roman province in AD 106, and from there the Romans did what they did in most other new provinces, importing Roman law, Roman infrastructure, Roman people, and, consequentially for our story today, Roman language. Or actually the Latin language. Something you'll actually notice on this map, in fact, is that the Roman province, or at least the majority of the cities they established, was actually centered more toward the western half of the region, directly into the Carpathians themselves. This can be explained in large part by the presence of gold, silver, and copper in the mountains. After all, Dacia wasn't a cheap province to conquer. However, even with its metallic wealth, Dacia was incredibly difficult for Rome to administer and defend, being directly across one of the massive rivers the empire used to define most of its northern border. This ultimately led to the vulnerable province being more or less abandoned by the end of the 3rd century, as the empire's fortunes began to wane. I've said it before and I will say it again, the best way to learn a language is total immersion, but flights are expensive, and if you're learning a language, you're probably more interested in a way to really immerse yourself in the language before you embarrass yourself in that country by using a word in the wrong context. LingoPie recognizes that the second best way of immersing yourself in a language you want to learn is to watch movies and TV shows in said language. Unfortunately, subtitles don't always match the dubbing, and even when you're watching a show in its native language, characters can still say a lot of crazy complicated things that'll be completely lost on you even with subtitles. What LingoPie does is use its own subtitles that you can click on to learn more about a specific word and see the specific context it's being used in, like how it's conjugated. It can then add that word to a list of words that you can review later on. You can also slow down while you're watching to make it a bit more beginner-friendly, and you can even practice your pronunciation with the Say It feature.
Soddisfare un palato reale.
To get you on the right track to learn, LingoPie provides over 3,000 movies and TV shows to choose from, courtesy of dozens of local channels from all over the world, and even the ability to connect your Netflix and Disney Plus accounts for even more content, whether on desktop, mobile, or physical TV. As of March 2025, their catalog features 11 different languages, and they're always adding more. In fact, they've just recently added Dutch and Turkish, which is good because Türkçe mi geliştirmem gerekiyor. Go to the link in the description to get a 7-day free trial of LingoPie, as well as a 55% discount. And now back to your scheduled Romania. While the territory of Dacia shifted between Eastern Roman and Visigothic control, this half of Europe saw Slavic tribes migrate south into the Balkans, alongside the Turkic Avars, revealing an exciting innovation created by this partnership: Bulgaria. The First Bulgarian Empire spent the early Middle Ages spreading its reach throughout the Danube basin, butting heads and rubbing shoulders with the Eastern Roman Empire, at least until this one guy named Basil came into power. But there was another prominent group of people in the area, the Latin speakers themselves. Now, historians disagree on whether these were Latin speakers who remained in Dacia for all these centuries, or who migrated later on from nearby, or maybe even a combination of the two. But by the 9th and 10th centuries, the dialect of Latin spoken north of the Danube already began to resemble the Romanian language we see today. This came at around the same time the Pannonian Basin to the west was being settled by a certain group of Uralic language speakers, creating a brand new kingdom that we know as Hungary. The people who spoke this Eastern Romance dialect, though, were known by basically everyone around them as the Vlachs, possibly deriving from a Celtic tribe that once lived in the region, who after the Mongol conquests would also form their own kingdoms of Wallachia and Moldavia. However, these kingdoms would spend the next few centuries under intermittent Hungarian influence, while Transylvania spent this time as a full-on Hungarian province. But then, everything changed when the Ottoman Empire attacked, with Romania, most of Hungary, and the Balkans as a whole once again under Constantinople-based rule, just under a different flavor. Throughout all this time, the lands of modern Romania, and in particular Transylvania, served as something of a melting pot between different groups over the centuries. Home to the early Romanians, a group of Hungarians known as the Székelys, and even many thousands of German-speaking immigrants, as you'll no doubt remember from my video on everywhere around the world where people speak German. While I could go on all day talking about which different kingdoms ruled the territories at any one time, it was in the early 19th century when Wallachia and Moldavia became something of a geopolitical battleground between the declining Ottoman Empire and the rising Russian and Austro-Hungarian empires. Or, well, mostly the Russians and the Ottomans, and the 13 wars they fought from the 16th through the 20th centuries. Seriously though, with how many Russo-Turkish wars there have been, you'd think some of them would have ended in a Treaty of Paris just for the fun of it. In 1859, the two Romanian principalities would unify to form the United Principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia, eventually breaking away from Ottoman vassalage after the Russo-Turkish War, in 1877, to form the independent Kingdom of Romania. Transylvania, meanwhile, remained Hungarian this whole time, which by now meant it was under the dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary. However, throughout the 19th century, Europe saw a huge increase in nationalism, seeing the formation of new compound nations like Italy and Germany, and new breakaway states like Greece. The Austrian Empire was particularly vulnerable to these movements, as even the transformation into a more decentralized set of nations under a dual monarchy wasn't enough to keep these different groups from wanting independence outright. Indeed, this is what motivated a certain young revolutionary to cut the Archduke's trip to Sarajevo dramatically short. After the outbreak of World War I, Romania initially remained neutral, but 2 years into the fighting signed a secret treaty with the Entente, who promised them Transylvania if they were to declare war on the Central Powers. And so they declared war on the Central Powers. World War I ultimately formed the final nail in the coffin for Austria-Hungary, with the former empire shattering into several different pieces, including Transylvania, which, as promised, went to Romania. Hungary, however, was not so thrilled by this turn of events, as although Transylvania was mostly populated by Romanians, there still remained a large Hungarian population now outside Hungarian borders, something which remains a sore spot between Hungarians and Romanians, just to wildly understate things. In 1940, during the Second World War, Transylvania was even split north to south, with the northern half connecting Székelyland to mainland Hungary. This, however, had the knock-on effect of making Hungary very long. And while this would be undone after the war's conclusion, the Soviets had also claimed the region of Bessarabia, establishing the Moldavian SSR, which today remains the separate country of Moldova. So how was Romania able to hold itself together as a nation despite being divided by the Carpathian Mountains? Well, mostly because the Carpathians aren't actually that much of an obstacle. The tallest mountain in the entire chain, the Slovakian is only 2,600 meters above sea level, and even then is already situated on high ground, so Romania is not exactly dealing with the Alps. In fact, mountains can serve as just as much of a stronghold as a barrier, just as Switzerland, or Nepal, or Bhutan. So while the Carpathians may be a bit of a natural divide, they're far from an insurmountable one. Don't forget to check out LingoPie, and I'll see you in the next video. Or more like the other way around, because that's how videos work, but you get the idea.